Item number 2 is Dr. Michael Baldassarre, Director of Special Education, and I'd like to request to bring him forward to give a special education overview and the Parent Advisory Council update.
So moved. Second motion.
Motion has been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it, and Mr. Baldassarre is already here.
Thank you, Superintendent and Chair. And,
He jumped the gun, he's excited.
I'm sorry.
You missed out last
I thought you'd approve. So I thank you for allowing me to be here this evening. The presentation that you're about to see was scheduled to be presented at the City Council meeting, but I was not allowed to speak. And so since in special education, it's commonplace in Massachusetts and throughout the country for a district to spend 20 to 25% of its budget on special education. I think it's very pertinent that the community and that the committee and all those interested have an understanding of what's happening in special education and the efforts that we have engaged in to save the taxpayers' dollars and be able to put more into teaching and learning in the school community. When we look at special education enrollment here in Everett, there are a number of students who are outplaced. They go to either private schools or collaboratives. And the cost of those placements are not negotiated by us. They are set by the Operational Services Division of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, OSD. OSD oversees combis, and they oversee all of the vehicles in the state. And they have a number of regulatory obligations, and one of them is to set special education pricing. The cost of a single placement for one disabled student can be as low as $45,000, very, very unlikely to be less. And for students who are multiply disabled or blind or have more significant disabilities, the cost for 1 year for one student can be as high as $345,000. Right now in the Everett Public Schools, we have 97 students who are in these placements. And some of them are just in 45-day placements because they need extra assessment. The number of new placements in FY18 is now up to 30 from what we anticipated at the beginning of the year. 9 of these students are placed in residential or learning facilities by the Department of Children and Families. We do not have discretion over this. The Department of Children and Families places them, and then we are mandated to pay 50% of the total cost of placement. There's 9 students in this position, and some of these placements with the 50-50 cost share are as high as $150,000 per student. Just during the week of February 5th to February 10th, we had 13 new special education students come into the Everett Public Schools. We had another 13 come in during the next week. 10 of these children were children who turned age 3, and they became part of early intervention. And we had 3 students move in from either other districts and 1 student who came in from abroad. It costs more to educate children in special education. Our children need smaller class sizes, specialized equipment, nursing care, occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech and language pathology. They need specialized services, specialized transportation, and, as I said before, some of these students are in residential treatment facilities for 365 days a year. A cut to the EPS budget can mean a cut in services for these students, the students who need it most. If you take a look at this graph, let's take a moment to digest it. This graph was generated with figures from a state report that's called the circuit breaker. We received some funding from the Department of Education to offset expenses for out-of-district placements that we just spoke of. As you can see from this graph, Everett has reduced its dependency on out-of-district organizations for our children since fiscal year 2013. The report shows a reduction of 29 students over the last 5 years, and we all know that the population of students that our enrollment is growing. This has not been the case for our counterparts in Revere, Chelsea, and Malden. As you can see from this graph, these 3 districts with similar demographics to ours They've had huge increases in the number of students that are placed out of district. In Revere, the number of students that are out of district has nearly doubled in the last 5 years. Last year, our circuit breaker reimbursement from the Department of Education was funded at 75%. This year, the department will only fund it at 65%. This is an additional loss of $200,000 that was not reported to you in any other report of lost funding thus far. Take a moment and look at this picture. In this graph, you can see just how much out-of-district placements cost us, our neighbors, and really all districts across the state. Where Everett has reduced its spending on out-of-district claims by nearly $1.5 million over the last 5 years, our neighbors have nearly doubled their expenses. How is it that while our neighbors' costs double, ours are reduced by more than 20%? The answer is in the investment that you have made in our state-approved therapeutic day school right across the street from City Hall, the Devens School. There's currently 64 students in the Devens School, and 53 are ours, but 11 come from other districts. Those 11 students bring us approximately $400,000 in revenue. As I mentioned before, special education transportation is very costly. We spend an average of $127 per day per student for students who are going to out-of-district placements that I spoke of, the collaboratives, the private placements. Students at the Devens School, however, many of them walk to school. And for those that don't walk to school, the cost is only $23.75 for an in-district transport. What this means is that the cost of transportation at the Devens School is saving the Everett Public Schools over $1 million per year, just in transportation. If you take a look at the overall figures of the Devens School, you'll see that it costs us about $2.54 million to run the Devens. This includes all salaries and benefits, rent, utilities, supplies, related services, and taxes. Because the building is not owned by the City of Everett or the Everett Public Schools, we lease that building for $429,000 a year, and we pay the city $100,000 in taxes. So we take in part of our 29% for net school spending, and we turn around and hand $105,000 right back to the city. So in line 2, we take the amount of revenue and we deduct that from the operating cost. In line 3, we deduct the transportation savings that I just spoke of from the operating costs. In line 3, we recognize that those kids that are at the Devens School, our 53 students, if they were outplaced at collaboratives or Lighthouse or Compass or private schools, it would cost us almost $3 million to educate those students. So when you deduct all of the savings and the revenue from how much it costs to operate the Devens, you will find that our special education department, our Devens School, your choice to open that school, has saved the city of Everett $1.8 million this year and this year alone. That doesn't include last year and the year before that and the year before that and the year before that, which has caused all of our out-of-district placements to be far less than they were and that they would be right now. I surmise if we did not have the Devens School, ladies and gentlemen, that our costs would be higher than Revere's for out-of-district placements. We have a community of students who have tremendous special education needs. Now, that's just one area of savings. The second area of savings is even a little bit more serious. If you think about, for just a moment, what took place in Florida last week, and think about what the possibilities would have been if there was enough mental health counseling, enough mental health services for one individual, the difference that would have made in the lives of those children there, in the lives of people in Florida, and the lives now of all of us across the country. In the spring of 2015, we held a mental health summit here at Everett High School. This provided an opportunity for our school officials and community mental health service providers, first responders, state agencies, to have an open and honest dialogue with one another about how we're serving our children. At that time, we had 100 children in the Everett Public Schools receiving mental health counseling on a regular basis. And that was through the services of an IEP. And we were able to retrieve Medicaid reimbursements from those services, which was a good thing, but not enough kids were getting services. As you can see from this slide, we had 11 full-time employees providing these services. With their, we had 11 full-time employees providing these services, and those 11 employees cost the district about $1.1 million just for the services to 11 students. Now, if I go back to go to the next slide, with those counselors, departure times, prep time, duties, other school-wide responsibilities, lunch, many students who were in need of services could not and would not ever be seen. At the same time, the Yamana Clinic on Chelsea Street reported a waiting list of more than 150 students waiting to be seen, and some students waiting 2 months or longer to see a mental health counselor. We had to work in a way that would allow us to retrieve Medicaid reimbursements for our counseling work, and that meant that kids receiving counseling had to be on IEPs, as I had mentioned. This added paperwork, IEP meetings. This meant that kids receiving counseling had to be on IEPs, the same as we have them to see OT, PT, and other specialists. So what happened? We made a decision to replace our adjustment counselors with Elliott clinicians. When we were at the city council meeting, somebody brought up a $225,000 settlement as like it was a bad thing. What we actually did when we brought those clinicians into this district is we outsourced the cost. Because now these children and their families use their mass health cards to receive services. What that meant for us was a reduction in costs into the hundreds of thousands. What it meant for our kids is rather than 100 students being counseled, 444 students are now receiving services. We no longer have to give children elaborate assessments to receive these services. We no longer need 11 full-time employees to provide these services. Our kids now have longer counseling sessions, up to 45 minutes rather than 30 minutes. They can get counseling in school, and the Elliott clinicians are also available to them at home on Saturdays and Sundays. The Elliott clinicians are in our schools during our vacations, and our families and our kids are coming into our schools to see the Elliott clinicians while everybody else is home on break. Things that we could not do with the adjustment counselors that we had. They also have access to all services from the Children's Behavioral Health Initiative, which includes therapeutic mentoring, counseling for the families, and wraparound services. As I mentioned, we quadrupled the number of students who are receiving mental health counseling. At the same time, as a result, the waiting list at the Yamana Clinic is now 0. No waiting list, no waiting at all. The cost of providing services went to over $1 million to less than $500,000 per year. If you take a look at these graphs that I made for you, what you'll find on the left is from fiscal year 2013 until now, how many more students are receiving mental health counseling in the Everett Public Schools. If you look at the graph on the right, you can see how much less it costs. That $225,000 settlement was part of this. It was a good thing. It was a responsible thing. We're providing more and better services for our families, and given what we saw in Florida, these are things that should not and could not be taken away. So if you examine the cost effectiveness of what we call this preferred provider model, you look at the savings from FY17 and the savings from FY18, and you subtract the settlement amount from that, and you'll find that we have saved $1.2 million by providing 4 times the service for our kids in a 2-year period. You add that savings to the savings of the Devens School, and you find that the special education department all by itself, in the Everett Public Schools has saved $3 million between last year and this year. If we add last year's Devens savings to this, it goes up to over $4 million. If we add the savings of the Devens the 2 years before that, it goes to more than $6 million. We're really proud of the, can you put it back to that slide, Kevin? We're really proud of the work that we've done, and it's an amazing thing to see things like this work, and I thank you for the opportunity to share it with the community, and if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them at this time.
I would like to make a statement because of that foolishness we saw last week at City Hall. Councilor DePiero made that comment about the $225,000 settlement like it was a bad thing.
Yeah.
But if he had spent any time to find out what it was about, it never would have come up. But again, it was part of that foolishness we had to go through last week.
Okay, any questions? Mr. Parker?
I got a few. Is there any,
2 minutes per.
yeah, okay, that'd be quick. Any plans to look at the out-of-district placements to see if we can bring them back in-house?
So,
Is there a review
yeah,
process for that?
We do. A lot of our students who are outplaced are students with autism spectrum disorder, and it's why it's called a spectrum. There's sometimes very low incidence of disability and sometimes really serious. We could absolutely create a program for these students, but we don't have the physical space right now.
Gotcha.
Some of our students that go to the Devens School, and the Devens School does not provide enough rigor or enough services for, they need oftentimes physical restraints on a regular basis. Those students are placed out of district. Students with blindness and multiple disabilities that are medically fragile, we just can't, we just can't, it's logistically, it's not possible to have them in our schools.
Okay, so the answer to my question is then is that, these are people we can't service, we know we can't service, and to bring them back into the Devens is not a possibility.
The regulations that we're really strict with is that the students should be educated in their home district as often as possible and as close to home.
Okay.
So even when some folks demand out-of-district placements, if it's not appropriate, we say no. And we give them the best program that we can right here at home.
When a student moves in from another public district,
Yep.
is there any point that they absorb some of the cost?
If the student comes from an educational collaborative, the day he or she gets here, the day they're enrolled, we start paying the bill. If they're in a private educational setting, like Compass or Walker, that's not a collaborative, we don't have to start paying the bill until July 1st in the next fiscal year so that we can plan for it. If they come here after April 1st, then for the whole next year, the district from which they came has to pay the bill.
April 1st of...
So if a student comes in on April 1st of 2018, say April 2nd, and is going to Walker, the bill for that student must be paid by the district from which he or she came for all of fiscal year 19.
Okay.
But if it's from a collaborative, then the students, we pick up the bill immediately. So with transient populations of students, it's a wise thing for someone in my position to make sure that they have collaborative placements. That way, if they move, the fiscal responsibility for their program, which is a very appropriate program, is passed on to wherever they move to.
Okay. Next to last question. Your graph regarding the impact of preferred provider model. You're showing a total cost of $473,000.
Yes,
Okay, that includes the $225,000 settlement.
yes.
Does that mean,
I'm sorry. The settlement, I took the settlement off of the total savings for the last 2 years.
okay,
This was a total cost of operation and the total number of students who are counseling.
okay, so the total cost of operation in the current fiscal year is $473,000.
Yes.
Does that include the settlement?
That does not.
It does not?
No, I put the
Okay.
settlement onto the next slide.
All right.
Yep.
And lastly, Medicaid reimbursements.
Yeah.
I think, from what I've seen in talking to people and what I've seen online, there's just a cloud of misunderstanding about, what it is you know, whose money in is it, and why we would expect it
Yeah.
to come back into the budget.
I'm glad you
And
asked.
I didn't see it, I was hoping that it'd be in your package here.
So.
Could you give us some
Yeah,
insight, please?
I'll give you, the rundown is this. So, the Medicaid program, it's a federal program. There's federal dollars. The federal dollars go from Washington to the state. And those dollars are given to, for services that are performed in school. Occupational therapy, physical therapy, counseling, speech and language pathology, orientation and mobility, teachers of the visually impaired, special services that kids with disabilities need, and specialized transportation. And so what happens is, and we are very, very diligent about this. When I first came into the district, we were getting about $800,000, $800,000 in Medicaid. Yes. And I analyzed what we were doing, and I realized we could be doing more to increase our reimbursements. So I did plenty of professional development with our personnel to make sure that when a student is on an IEP, that their Medicaid form is filled out to find out if they're eligible. Once that's filled out, any service that's in the service delivery grid of the IEP is just like a doctor writing a prescription. It's reimbursable through Medicaid, whatever is in that grid. So we had kids who were getting occupational therapy and physical therapy who were on 504 plans. You don't get reimbursed for that. So I had our ETLs get those kids on IEPs and make sure that we are claiming every service that we possibly could. End result, as you could see from the various letters that have passed your chairs, our Medicaid reimbursement went from $800,000 now to approximately $1.5 million. We have to pay $60,000 to report to get that money back into our system. So if you think about the taxes plus what we pay for Medicaid reporting, there's $160,000 that's gone, right? But the $1.5 million is for services that are provided to disabled children. Now, in most communities that are funded at 110 or 120% of net school spending, nobody asks for the Medicaid money because nobody needs it. In communities where net school spending is 100%, like, let's see just how much I can do the bare minimum, that money is so important to the schools. And in those communities, it's commonplace for the money to be given to the school. The way the money comes from the federal government to the state and to the district is it goes through the local government, and it's the local government's responsibility to give it to the school. In most communities, it's not an issue. Nobody cares because they're funded so much better than 100%. In communities that are funded at 100%, that $1.5 million makes all the difference in the world, and it's really important that we have it because we're receiving it for working with disabled children. We are spending to get that reimbursement. And I'm making sure that we're maximizing it and that we have the personnel there to do it. And so I have really examined the Medicaid system. I even met with Senator Rosenberg's office about it, and I've voiced my complaints to the state to say that in communities like Everett and other communities in which I've been so fortunate to serve, that funding really should be going to the special education program in the schools. When we cut services, you cut the Devens School, you cut mental health counseling, you cut OT, PT, speech, guess what? The end result is it costs you more money. In special education, you have to spend to save. And that's exactly what we've done, and you can see the figures here. We've done much more than this, but these are the big take-home numbers that we're really proud of in special ed, because we did this by we saved money. Think about this. We saved money, and we quadrupled service. We saved money, and we opened a school to serve our kids. Special education is an investment, and you have to spend to save, and I'm so concerned that if the budget gets cut, it's going to wind up costing us more.
All right, thank you.
Now, the other thing, just in response to why should the Medicaid money come to the schools? Well, as the doctor just presented, It is all of our personnel that documents everything, provides all the services, applies for the reimbursement. And for probably since Mr. Hanlon has been mayor, say it's been about 10 or 15 years, we've gotten that 100%. Prior to that, there was this thing, they'll keep so much and give us some, you know, that
$524,000.
foolishness. And, but then when Mr. Hanlon became mayor, he realized, again, like we're talking, everything's done here, it's the school's money, it's money that they don't account for, it's nothing to do with the tax rate, got nothing to do with anything, other than the work we do. And that's why we feel it should be given to us. But most importantly, because of what the doctor said, being funded at 101 or 102% of net school spending, nothing to be proud of. We need to get money every place we can go. And then to tell us that we've given you $1 million above net school spending, but we're gonna take $2.5 million, doesn't fly. And that's really what Medicaid is all about. Work that we do, services we provide, and the people that we're talking about providing the services fill out this random moment in time. The federal government could call you at 9 o'clock tonight. I wanna know what you did with Brent Forrest there today. They call when they want, so that you better be ready to let them know exactly what you did with me or the doctor or whoever else on a day like today.
All right, thank you.
So it's a lot of work by our people.
Have a couple more questions, I believe. Mr. Barros first.
Actually, it's not a question, just a comment. Dr. Baldassarre, thank you very much for your
Thank you.
presentation. I just want to share that about a month ago, I went to a meeting. There is a volunteer group of mothers whose kids are in our schools. They are all special needs, and they have this. It's a support group where mothers whose kids have special needs. They come every month. New mothers come and receive assistance from these other mothers who have kids with special need for many years. And I went there. They invited me to go, and they all spoke highly of your work, Dr. Baldassarre, and our schools, and the service that their kids receive in our schools. So I just want to mention that to my colleagues, to those at home, and thank you, Superintendent, for this outstanding work, because I'm here sharing what I heard from them directly.
And that's who we
from
take care
those
of.
mothers.
Exactly.
About the services that these kids receive. There were about 30 mothers that day when I went.
Thank you.
I believe Mr. Relo was next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have a couple of comments, and as representative to the MASC, I know this has been an issue on our plate for the last 10 to 15 years, and I'm sure, go back in the minutes, we've been discussing this. And Mr. Parker, the other caveat that goes with that is regional school districts. If you're in a regional school district, you get the money regardless, but in separate school districts, you don't. And that's one of the issues that they've been working on, and I know MASC has been working on, about making sure that the special education Medicaid billing money comes, and all that money comes back to the district. And even though we have to go through the municipal government into their funds, and then it has to get released to us. And I think that that's, and I remember 2006 fighting for, once the teachers got their raise, once the 85-15 went through, that the previous mayor used that money to help offset the increase of the 85-15 from that time ago. And also, I'd like to say, just with what went on last Monday night and what happened unfortunately on Tuesday, just listening to the students that spoke last Monday night, that even though I think we're going in the right direction with providing services to our children, because to a student, it sounded as though they feel that their schools are a safe haven. And I think that that's what we want to make sure, that our schools are a safe environment and that they have people there listening to them, to make sure that we get those services, and to make sure, again, the whole push in this Commonwealth has been on social emotional learning and making sure that students feel comfortable and they're able to learn in a safe environment. I think that that's one thing that we do well, but I'm sure that we can always do better. And kudos to everybody that's working on that.
Thank you. Ms. Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Baldassarre, just for clarification, the students that are seeing the mental health providers through Elliott, the counselors, they do not need to have an IEP, is that correct?
No longer. We eliminated that, the paperwork, the meetings, to free people up to be doing other work. So now, to access counseling, they meet with the Elliott clinician with their family and do all the paperwork through Elliott. And then in our agreement, Elliott can share all information with us. So what's happened is, these folks have become part of the school. The parents don't even know that they're not school employees.
Okay.
Perfect partnership, and as I said at the opening of the Family Resource Center just a few days ago, in my 20 years, this is the best and most powerful partnership I've ever seen, because it's the biggest win-win financially in providing services to kids. And, you know, you see it every day, and I give the superintendent a counseling census that started at 101 2 years ago. And he says to me, wow, we're at 444 now. Less ambulances in front of our schools. Suspension is down 20-25%. Infractions are down. Detentions are down. Attendance is up. You know, sometimes it happens with a small group. This is district-wide. This is every school. Something to be proud of, and just applaud our partnership and Elliott's willingness to work with us.
Thank you. So one more question along with that. Since they don't need to do an IEP to qualify, are we getting Medicaid
No, so
reimbursement at all from that?
to save that money, we had to sacrifice Medicaid, because we are no longer funding the counseling. You see, for the most part, you know, only a small percentage is being funded by us. And what we're funding is we're funding the kids who are not Medicaid eligible. So Medicaid eligible students are getting counseling through Medicaid, so we're not going to get the reimbursement, but we're not going to pay for it at all. Keep in mind, like on a Medicaid reimbursement, let's say a social worker, for 30 minutes, we would be reimbursed only about $14 through Medicaid for 30 minutes. It costs us, you know, $40.
Right.
Same thing with physical therapy. Every 15 minutes, we could be reimbursed $7. But a physical therapist costs over $100,000 a year. So the Medicaid reimbursement that we get back is actually only a fraction of what it costs to provide the services. We don't get full reimbursement for it.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
But it is our guidance counselors, our therapists and stuff like that, that we get reimbursement for. These people, these counselors he's talking about, because they are private, there's no reimbursement for those.
Mr. Abruzese, I believe, before you...
Thank you,
move
Mr.
on.
Chairman. Dr. Baldassarre, I just, in terms of, as I look at this, and from what I heard last week, I guess my problem with it is, I was always fascinated with numbers, because what I've found out, and I think we've all found out, you can make numbers say anything. You know, I thought one way, and then I saw a presentation last week that told me something entirely different. In terms, just so we're all on the same page, it's mandated that we have to pay, and the cost can be $45,000 up to $345,000. And we actually do have a student that's $150,000.
We have one student who's 300, I want to say 300 and either $340,000 or $360,000 a year for one student.
And again, that just comes, it's ordered, it comes right out of our budget.
Yeah, it's a long story.
It's an important story in the sense that my difficulty with all of this is, then you add that, you know, we've got a bunch of new placements just since February 5th, and then we got more placements the week later. And I'm not a CPA and I'm not the CFO of Everett, but how in the world can you come up with a budget and stick to that budget when it seems like it's something that's ever changing and you have no control over it?
Yeah, generally, what happens is students turn 22 and they're done with special education. Students graduate and they're
Right.
done. We bring kids back. And so what usually happens is it's a flow. They graduate, a few students come in. They turn 22, a couple of students are added. This year has been out of control. And it has not just been for us. I attend an urban special education directors meeting. Our counterparts in Somerville, in Chelsea, in Malden, in Revere are all saying the same thing, that there's just been an explosion of students with really, really high needs.
And again, I mean, you have to supply the service.
Yes.
Because it's been determined that the child, whether the child lives here, or someone may live somewhere else and get sent to us, right? I mean,
That's right.
And it has happened, you know, if you think about the news just in the Commonwealth, it has happened where students who should have been in other locations were not, and travesty has taken place because the right services were not being provided. And it's Googleable events.
Let me just support the statement you're making. We had that meeting last Monday night. Tuesday morning, in his office, parent shows up with her son, and he's severely handicapped. So Dr. Baldassarre talked with me. We had a doctor evaluate him to find out what we need to provide for services. Well, one of the things is a full-time nurse at $96,000 a year, just for the nurse. Who plans on that? I mean, walks right in, here I am, and you know what? You've got to take care of her. We don't have any choice.
oh, and just to follow up too, on one of your charts, you had the state report, and I believe you said last year, we got 75%. And then this year it got reduced to 65%.
Correct.
And that was just based on the state
They-
feeling like changing the formula?
That wasn't reported in the original loss of $365,000 in grant funding. So you take that $200,000, the $360,000 that we talked about before, the $60,000 that we pay for the Medicaid reporting, the $100,000 that we pay in taxes, very quickly, it gets to $1 million very quickly. And all of those things were completely out of our control. Now, what happens in most communities is the partnership with City Hall, they come to the rescue. That's what happens. In districts that are 100% of net school spending,
Well, I've been here for a few years. I was there several terms back when. My question is it ever foreseeable that there's actually going to be a reduction? Have we experienced from one year to the next a drastic reduction?
In special ed services?
Special ed
No.
services?
Here 52 years, and it's climbed every single year.
we went up from October 1st of 2017 until now, we have approaching 200 more students in special education because of kids turning 3 and coming in, because of kids moving in, because we evaluate here in first and second grade, and we find that students are absolutely in need of services. So the numbers have been astounding. And those students who are in district, where we're serving them with our excellent programs, we have to hire special ed teachers. I have regulations. I can't have more than a certain number of kids in a class.
Right.
We have to hire occupational therapists, physical therapists, and speech and language pathologists for these students. They have to have these services. They're mandated by federal law.
Plus their teacher and their aide that goes with them, all of those support people. So people think, oh, you hired people. Well, if 5 of you show up, we can't service you with what we have. So we have to hire additional teachers, additional therapists, additional teacher aides. That happens all the time.
And I take it, just to finish, and that's audited by, I mean, that's checked on. This isn't something you could just say, yeah, we've got these people and not supply the services
Let me
again.
explain one thing to you. Families that are in those situations have and receive services from advocates and attorneys. Attorneys make money representing these people. Those people don't pay. We pay, or the state pays, when it's found that the service wasn't provided. So there are attorneys that make a living every day researching these cases, coming, challenging us, going through this exercise.
And if you're sued, and I've been in special education long enough that it comes, if you're sued and you lose, you will pay for the cost of the placement, you will pay your attorney's fees, and you will also pay the attorney's fees for the family as well. So you gotta be good, you gotta be right. And you talk about the seriousness of these services, not long ago, maybe 10 or 12 years ago, a student at Lincoln Sudbury High School was murdered in the school. Now, you talk about how important it is that we have better than adequate services, better than the minimum for our kids. It's so, so important, and I have to advocate as strongly as I possibly can for our kids and for our community. That's why you brought me here.
That's
Right.
exactly why you're here.
And so I have to do it. And, I can't fathom any cuts in special education, especially given all that we are doing to be efficient and excellent at the same time. We lost a grant because we are so in compliance.
Compliance and
We
successful.
complied so well, they cut $64,000 in funding. You don't need it anymore. Thanks.
They cut $357,000 all
But
told.
$64,000 in professional development, gone. And I had activities planned all year for our professionals to continue doing what we're doing. And the state and they didn't even give us notice. It wasn't like they said, be advised that next year you're not going to get this grant. I was waiting for the grant in September and going into October when I got an email that said, you will not receive these funds because it's being allocated to districts who need assistance. We're one of 4 urban communities in the state to have it pulled because we don't need assistance anymore.
Just think of that,
Thank
one
you.
of 4 communities.
We're not done with you yet. Mr. Parker has a few more questions.
Well, that last discussion brought a question. I'm sure that we have adult placements that are institutionalized 24/7. You just spoke about the nurse for $96,000 a year. When does it become a healthcare responsibility as opposed to a school responsibility in situations like that?
It used to be, Mr. Parker. There was a time when our students who had nursing services in school, the nurses were provided by Mass Health. Mass Health has now taken the position that they are no longer funding nursing services that are required in school. It's the responsibility of the district. So I get a call from 2 attorneys at Health Law Advocates that says student A, B, C, or D, because it's happened a number of times, is having reduced nursing services from Mass Health, and it's the responsibility of the district to pick it up.
But we're in education, we're not in healthcare.
Exactly. And I say to them exactly what you just said. And they say, look, if we go to the BSEA, you know what's going to happen. The BSEA is the Board of Special Education Appeals, and they will rule that the services need to be provided by the school.
One more, really quick.
You all set, Mr. Parker?
No, well, I just want to...
Yeah, I mean, I'm dumbfounded.
Look,
Just-
what's happening to us is they keep putting more and more responsibilities on the schools, and you're becoming as much of a social agency as you are an educational agency. How many times have you heard that a kid goes to court for some reason? What's the court's, the judges, how does he resolve it? You gotta go to school every day. We have to take it on and correct the situation, right? He makes it part of his decree, and you see it every day. But again, we're becoming more and more of a social agency, dealing with families, never mind students, and students with severe needs that we wouldn't have saw years ago.
And by the way, our students with special needs are achieving at high levels. That cannot be understated. Not left to the wayside.
Let me tell you another thing. There's and I've told you people this before, the hardest thing as superintendent of schools is to have a young couple come in with their baby, 3 years old, because that's when they become ours. They'll come to my office with their baby and say, the doctor told me when he turns 3, he can go to school and be like the other children. Then you gotta have a talk with them about, we're gonna take him or her. But they're not gonna go to the Webster School, or they're not going to the Parlin School. They'll end up in some kind of service that the doctor's gonna provide. They are not gonna be part of our STEM team. They're not gonna be part of the band, And you have that kind of conversation with young parents, and I'll tell you something, it's a very emotional moment, and not an easy time to be superintendent. And then we have to listen to that, that we had to do last week. And cheap comments by other people around They don't even know what goes on in this business. Schools in every community are the largest commodity they have. You have 1,039 people that work for us. You don't have 400 or 500 employees for the city. You have 10 schools. You have all school. The biggest amount of this city's money in terms of property is in the schools. This high school alone is probably worth more than the whole city's got in buildings. You could take City Hall, police station, fire station, put them all in the auditorium, right? Think about it. So we have a big responsibility. We got to take care of it, and we do everything. That's what happens in this business. We do everything. So then you know, there was another comment made which bothered me quite a bit. A cheap statement. There'll be no more out-of-state travel. Like we're going out of state. We, the people sitting around this table. No one in this room has ever gone out of state. No administrator in the Everett Public Schools has ever gone out of state. All right. It is our STEM team that are national champions. Last year, well, the year before, they went to Florida and came in 10th. Last year, they were in Troy, New York, and they won. National champions, okay? Your percussion ensemble, their first competition is in Connecticut in a few weeks. Now, you know, they're New England champions. So we're not going anywhere. So we're not gonna send our kids. These are the things we're gonna take away because of the comments we listened to last week.
What about the band going to Washington for Memorial Day?
Not going. Not going. All right? That's all. It's an honor that a city like Everett would be recognized the way they are for their music program. The fact that every major military band has come to this school to perform. The President's Marine Corps band was here last year in the fall, right? You've had the Navy, the Air Force, they all come. You know why? Because of the program we have here. The invitation to be in their Memorial Day parade in Washington is because of what they see here.
They won the New England Championship.
Yeah, that's right.
They won the New England Championship. That's why they were invited.
Right? But I'll tell you, it's very disheartening to see the cheap comments made by people who haven't got a clue of what's going on, who have no skin in the game, if you will, other than to sit out there from someplace else and make comments. Or counselors who don't spend any time learning what's going on.
I do have one other
One more,
question by Ms.
quickly.
Ms. Cadillo.
To Dr. Baldassarre, and also to Mr. Forrester in this case. Looking at this and talking about the Elliott team and so forth, not now, because I would never want to say, I don't want to see this, I want to see anybody lose a job, but through attrition, could we possibly think about having people come in for speech therapy, all this physical therapy, occupational therapy, that aren't on as
Yeah,
city employees?
that's a great question, and I have looked into it, and believe me, with the success of this model, I would love to have gone another step. But in order to do that, we would have to be an actual clinic, which we are not. We have to have a Department of Health license. If we had a license with the Department of Health and had a clinic on site, then we would be able to do it. But since none of us are medical professionals, even able to apply for that license, it's not possible, but I always say yet. Because
So in
if
other
there's a way to
words,
do it.
if we
Yeah.
could do that,
Yeah,
then the people would actually work for that clinic.
correct.
So all of their benefits and so forth would be paid
Same as
out of
Elliott.
that budget, right? And so at some point, maybe down the road.
But, yeah.
And I'm talking through attrition, I'm not
Yeah.
talking now, because I know firsthand, I think our special ed program is second to none. And I have always raved about it and supported it. I just think it's wonderful. I've met children when they were 3 years old and watched them walk to get their diploma. And I could just cry now, just thinking about so many that wouldn't have had a chance somewhere else.
That's
And that makes me very proud. And I thank you for all that you do.
Last year, we had a student come in a wheelchair from Georgia. He was from Georgia, wheelchair bound.
Correct.
And his disabilities were unknown to us. He had no medical evaluation. He was He had cerebral palsy, and had to put him, I didn't even know what program to put him in, because I didn't know what his abilities were, because he couldn't speak English. Within a year and a half, he could speak English, he could read, he could write, and he had surgery at Boston Children's, and he could walk.
That's the truth.
No, he was recognized at the dinner.
He took this place down, the Memorial Day program.
Yeah.
Come out on the
We
stage.
saw him
you
on the
walked out.
stage.
Yeah.
Right.
I remember.
And, you know, one of the proudest moments for us, that a lot of districts, I don't know what services he would have gotten or who he would have been with, but he was in a class with the right number of kids, with the right teachers, and I eventually got a call, and they said, you know, we have to move him up to a different program.
That chart
Yeah.
right there explains it all. If that had been another city, he'd have been someplace else. We kept him right here. And he's been able to.
In a wheelchair. He had to make an emergency plan with the fire department, had to have an individual health care plan, so that if anything were to happen, we knew what to do with him. Went to the end of the earth for him, to the end of the earth, but look at the results. Look at the results.
That's excellent.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Baldassarre.
Thank you, thank you,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful
Thank you.
job.
Thank you very much.
He does a wonderful job. We glad to have him.
Thank you.
We're gonna keep him for another year.
Yes, Mr. Parker.
Just as he leaves, it's not, it's just a
all right.
comment. We pay $100,000 a year in taxes.
That's right.
Last year, we beat back charter reform, charter school reform on the state ballot, because this shows you that it's separate but unequal. We pay $100,000 a year in taxes, yet there's a charter school in this community, because they rent from a religious organization, does not pay taxes for that building. They were able to save money from year to year to year to build a bank account to go and purchase Eagle Bank in Everett Square on Church Street, taking that property off of the tax roll, and then they saved enough money to buy the old Contron Arrow International building on Plymouth Street, taking that building off the tax roll too. You know, we pay $100,000 a year, that's the rules, that's the way it is, but just goes to show you the inaccuracies we have in some of this, in all their purchases of property are being done with public money. So,
That's right.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.